You want to know the strangest thing I ever saw come down that road, and I'll tell you, but you have to promise not to laugh at the start, because the start is the only part that's funny. After that, it stops being funny real fast. It was a crate, taller than a man, taller than two men standing on a fence, and it came off a freight wagon in the wrong county, at the wrong farm, meant for the wrong hands. Inside was something no one within 300 miles had ever laid eyes on except in a torn circus bill. And it was dying. It was dying while four grown men stood around it scratching their heads, arguing whose problem it was. The only one who moved was a boy who hadn't yet turned 12. I've thought about that 1,000 times since. How the whole world can be full of men who know better, men with sense and years and reasons, and every one of them will stand still. And then some skinny child with dirt under his nails will step forward and do the thing that changes everything. Not because he understood it, because he couldn't stand to watch it stop. I wrote it all down, same as I write everything. And I'm going to tell it to you straight, the way it happened, mistakes and all. Because there are things I did that I'm not proud of. And there's one thing that boy did that I'll carry to my grave. Stay with me, I'll get you there. The crate came on a Thursday. I remember it was a Thursday because Thursdays I did the ledger, and I had the book open on the porch rail with my thumb holding the page when I heard the freight wagon coming up the wash. You learn the sound of every wagon that visits a place. This one I didn't know. Too heavy. The axles groaning like an old dog getting up off a cold floor, and the mules, four of them, which was two more than anybody sent to the marsh place, leaning into their collars with their heads down and their sides dark with sweat. I set the pencil in the crease of the book so I wouldn't lose my line. I've kept that habit 40 years. My wife used to say I'd stop to finish a sum in the middle of a house fire. She wasn't entirely wrong. The name on the place was Marsh, and the man on the place was Elias Marsh, and I was his foreman, which in a lean year like 85 meant I was his foreman, his fence mender, his horse doctor, and the man who told him no when he wanted to hear yes. There were two of us hired on that spring where the year before there'd been 5. That tells you enough about the money. Elias didn't say much about it. He didn't have to. You can read a bad year on a man's face same as you read weather on a sky. His boy was the one who came running. Caleb, 11 years old going on 12, all knees and elbows and a cowlick that no water could hold down. He came around the barn at a dead sprint the way he always did, like the ground behind him was catching fire, and he pulled up short by the porch with his chest heaving. "There's a wagon," he said. "I hear it. It's a big one." "I hear that too." He looked at me sideways, the way he did when he was deciding whether I was worth the trouble of getting excited around. Then he decided I wasn't and took off toward the road, and I closed the ledger and I followed. Slower. I was 51 that year and my knees had opinions about hills. The wagon pulled into the yard and stopped, and the driver, a squat, sunburnt fellow with a hat that had given up any particular shape years ago, climbed down and stretched his back till it cracked. Behind him came a second man, younger, greener, who stayed up on the seat with a clipboard of papers in his lap and a look on his face like a man who has been arguing with the first man for about 100 miles and lost. "This the Marsh place," the driver said. "It is." "Thank God," he spat. "You got no idea the road." I looked at the crate on the back of that wagon and I'll be honest, I didn't know what to make of it. It was built of green pine slats, nailed and roped and braced like they were shipping the courthouse. Tall. Taller than the wagon was long, which is a thing that shouldn't be possible on a road, and I understood then why the axles had been complaining. There were gaps between the slats, and out of one of those gaps, about level with my own eyes, something moved. Dark, wet-looking, a shine to it. An eye. It was an eye, and it was looking at me, and it was the biggest, softest, most frightened eye I had ever seen on a living thing, and I did not have one single word in my head for the animal it belonged to. "What in the hell?" I said. "Yeah," said the driver, "that's about the reaction we've been getting." Elias came out of the barn then, wiping his hands on a rag, and his boy was already up on the wagon wheel hanging off the side of the crate trying to see in. And Elias said, "Caleb, get down from there," in the tired voice of a man who has said a thing 1,000 times knowing it won't take. And Caleb didn't get down. "Papa," Caleb said, "Papa, come see." The driver handed a fold of papers up over the wheel. "You marsh." "I marsh." "Then this is yours, and I'll thank you to sign. And I'll thank you double to let me water these mules, because they've earned it and then some." Elias took the papers. I watched him read them. I watched his face do the thing a man's face does when the words on a page do not agree with the world in front of him. He read it twice. Then he looked up at the crate and up at the eye in the slats and back down at the paper. "This says marsh," he said slowly. "But this ain't. I didn't order any. What is this?" The young man on the seat spoke for the first time. "It's a giraffe, sir." Silence. A mule stamped. "A what?" "A giraffe, a calf, female near as the shipper could tell, young." He looked down at his clipboard like it might rescue him. "It was consigned to a Mr. J. Marsh, care of the rail depot at Caldwell for onward carriage to," he squinted, "the Hartwell Menagerie, private collection. Gentlemen out east buying up curiosities." He cleared his throat. "There's been an error, I think." "Damn right there's been an error," the driver said. "There's been about 4 of 'em. Depot mixed the manifests. Sent the ostriches to a fella in Kansas expecting seed corn, and sent us here." "But there's no giraffe supposed to be here," Elias said, and I heard something come loose in his voice, a thin note under the words. I can't, I got 40 head of cattle and a mortgage. I can't take delivery of a." "You already have," the driver said, not unkindly, and spat again. "Signed or not, it's off my wagon. I'm not hauling it another mile. Load's done, broke my second axle brace and I got to get to a smith before dark. You want to fight the depot about it, you write the depot. But the animal's here and it's here to stay, at least till somebody sorts it." And he lowered his voice and glanced up at the boy hanging off the crate and lowered it further so only Elias and I could hear. "And between you and me, mister, I don't think it's going to be a problem much longer if you take my meaning. It ain't 8 since the mother died 2 days back. It ain't standing right. I've hauled livestock 20 years. I know a thing that's fixing to give up." I looked at the crate. The eye was still on me. "Now I want to stop here and tell you something true, because if I tell this story clean it'll be a lie, and I don't tell those." My first thought, God forgive me, my first thought was let it die. I don't mean I wanted it dead. I mean I did the arithmetic the way a man does when the year is thin and the winter is coming and every mouth is a mouth. We didn't have the money. We didn't have the knowledge. Nobody in that county knew the first thing about what a creature like that ate or drank or needed to keep from freezing. It was going to die whether we lifted a finger or not. The driver said so, and the driver knew. And the only question in front of a sensible man was whether we spent our last 3 weeks of good weather killing ourselves over a thing that was already gone, or whether we let nature take the loss it was clearly determined to take, and went back to the cattle that might actually see us through to spring. That was the sensible thought. I had it plain as anything. And I looked at Elias and I saw the same thought behind his eyes, because Elias was a sensible man too, more sensible than me, worn down to sensible by a year that had taken his wife in the spring and his savings all summer. We were both going to let it die. And then Caleb dropped down off the wagon wheel and walked around to the back of the crate where the big door was roped shut, and before either of us could say a word, he started untying the ropes. "Caleb," Elias said, "Caleb, stop that. She can't breathe good in there." "Caleb." "She can't breathe, Papa." His fingers were working the knots, fast, sure. He was good with knots, that boy always had been. And I stood there like a fence post and watched a child's hands undo a thing 4 grown men were still arguing about. "You can hear her. Listen." And I did listen. And under the sound of the mules and the wind there was another sound, a small wet laboring sound. a breath being pulled and pushed through a chest that was working too hard for it. And once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it, and I have never in my life been able to unhear it since. Elias closed his eyes. The driver said, "Mister, I wouldn't. She comes out of that box, she ain't going back in easy." But the last rope was already free, and the door swung down on its rope hinge with a bang that spooked the mules, and Caleb stepped back. And for the first time, the whole of the thing came out of the shadow of that crate and into the light of a Texas afternoon. I'd seen a picture on a circus bill once in a town whose name I've lost, a bill for a show that had already left. So I knew the shape. I knew there was such a thing as a long-necked spotted creature from Africa that ate the tops of trees. But knowing the shape of a thing and standing 8 feet from it are two different kinds of knowing, and the second kind knocked the wind clean out of me. She was tall even lying down, legs folded under her all wrong, splayed. A young thing's legs that hadn't learned themselves yet. And the neck came up out of that pile of legs, long and swaying and uncertain. And at the top of it, a face that I can only tell you looked gentle, looked like it had been made by a hand that cared about softness, with those enormous dark eyes and lashes on them like a woman's Sunday fan, and 2 little knobs of horn wrapped in fur. Her coat was pale gold, and the spots on it weren't spots the way a cow is spotted. They were shapes, clean-edged, like somebody had laid brown leaves on cream and left the pattern. And she was dying. You didn't need the driver to tell you. The gold of her was going gray at the edges. Her breath came in that wet labor, and when Caleb stepped toward her, she didn't shy or startle. She just watched him come, too weak to do anything but watch, her ears, small ears, low on the head, turning to follow the boy. Caleb knelt down in the dirt in front of her. "Hey," he said, soft, the way you talk to a colt. "Hey now, it's all right." And that fool child put his hand flat on that dying animal's cheek, and she leaned into it. She leaned into his hand. I have loaded cattle into rail cars and pulled calves in the middle of ice storms and put down horses I raised from foals with my own rifle. And I like to think I'm not a soft man about animals. A man can't be in this work, or it'll break him. But I felt something go through me when that starving creature leaned her whole weak head into a child's open hand, like she'd been waiting her whole short life for exactly that, and had near given up on it coming. Elias made a sound, half a word, he didn't finish it. "Papa," Caleb said, not looking up, "she's cold, feel, she's so cold." His voice cracked in the middle of cold the way it was starting to do that year, catching between the boy it was and the man it was going to be. "We can't just—" He stopped. He swallowed. When he spoke again, it was very quiet and very fast, and he still didn't look up, because I think if he'd looked up and seen our faces, he'd have lost his nerve. "We can't just let her be cold." And that was it. That was the whole argument. He didn't say she was worth money, she wasn't ours and she'd cost us. He didn't say she was rare or grand or a wonder, though she was all three. He said we can't just let her be cold, which isn't a reason at all, which no sensible man would accept, and it went through every sensible thought I had like a nail through wet paper. Elias looked at me. I looked at Elias. "Oh hell," I said. I want to be honest about the next part too, because there's a version of this story where 3 noble souls rise up and save a beautiful creature and everybody feels good. And that is not the version that happened. What happened is we spent the next 4 hours making a series of decisions that ranged from uninformed to actively stupid, and got lucky again, and made it up as we went because there was nobody within a day's ride who knew a thing more than we did. First problem, warmth. The driver was right that she couldn't go back in the crate. She panicked when Caleb tried to coax her toward it, thrashing those long legs, and we near lost her right there when she tangled them trying to rise and went down hard on her side with a crack that made all of us wince. So the crate was out. We got her into the barn instead, and I'll tell you, getting a half-dead baby giraffe across 40 feet of yard is not a thing they teach you. It took all 3 of us and a canvas tarp used like a sling, and she weighed more than she looked and less than she should have, which is its own kind of terrible to feel in your arms. We banked her round with straw and put every blanket the house owned over her, and Elias built the barn stove up hotter than we'd ever run it. And the whole time Caleb sat with her head in his lap talking to her, low, endless, telling her, I heard bits of it, telling her about the farm, about the creek, about the cottonwood he climbed, about the dog we'd lost the winter before, whose name was Boone, and how she'd have liked Boone. Just talking. Just keeping a rope of words between her and wherever she was drifting toward, hauling her back, hand over hand with his voice. Second problem, and the one that near beat us, she wouldn't eat. The driver told us before he left, and he did leave. Once his mules were watered, with a look back over his shoulder I didn't like the meaning of, the driver told us the mother had died 2 days out, and the calf had had nothing since. Some kind of gruel the shipper's man had tried to spoon into her, and she'd taken a little, but not enough, and not lately. 2 days, a newborn. I've raised orphan calves on bottles. You've got a window with a young thing, and hers had near closed. She needs milk, Caleb said. Baby things need milk. We don't have, Elias started. The Petersons have a milk cow, too. I can ride over, I can. Caleb, it's near dark. I can ride, Papa. I've rid to Peterson's 100 times. I know the way in the dark, I know it. And here is the first of the heavy things, the first decision that wasn't easy, and I want you to sit with it a second the way we had to. Because a father has to weigh a thing here that isn't about the giraffe at all. Elias had lost his wife that spring. He had one child in the whole world, one. And that child was asking to ride a horse alone across 5 miles of dark, broken country, with the arroyos, and the rattlers that don't sleep in a warm autumn, and 100 small ways a horse can put a foot wrong in the dark, and a boy can go down under it, to fetch milk for an animal that a man who hauled livestock 20 years had already given up for dead. That's the sum Elias had to do. Risk the one thing left he couldn't stand to lose, on the long shot of saving a thing that wasn't his and probably couldn't be saved anyway. I saw him do the arithmetic. I saw him land where sense lands, which is no. And then he looked at his son's face. I've thought a lot about what a father sees in a moment like that. I never had children of my own, that's a longer story, and a sadder one, and not for tonight. But I've watched Elias marsh a lot of years, and I think what he saw was this. He saw that if he said no, and the animal died in the night the way it was surely going to, then some small door in his boy was going to close that he'd never get back open. That Caleb would learn at 11, the lesson the year had been trying to teach all of us, that you do the sum and you cut the loss, and you let the cold have what the cold wants. And Elias didn't want his boy to learn that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He'd learned it himself that spring, standing at a grave, and I think he'd have given anything to unlearn it. Take the Ledger horse, Elias said. Not the paint, the bay, he's surer in the dark. His voice was rough. And you ride careful, you hear me. You walk him through the wash by the dead oak, you don't try to jump it. And if the moon goes behind cloud, you stop and you wait. Promise me. I promise. Say it back. Walk the wash, wait for the moon, I promise, Papa. Go. And the boy went. And Elias stood in the barn door watching the dark swallow the sound of hooves, and his jaw was working. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would have helped, and we went back into the animal to wait. She got worse while he was gone. That's the part nobody warns you about. The waiting. The way a sick thing seems to know when help is on the road and decides to make a run at dying before it can arrive. Her breathing went from labor to something thinner, a rattle at the bottom of it, and the gray crept further up out of the gold, and her eyes, those great soft eyes, started to go somewhere else, half-lidding, drifting, the light in them pulling back like a lamp turned down. I knelt in the straw where the boy had knelt, and I put my hand on her cheek the way he had, and she didn't lean into it. She didn't have the strength to lean anymore. Don't you do it, I told her. I don't know why. I'm a grown man, and I know an animal can't understand English, can't understand anything, and I told her anyway low so Elias wouldn't hear me being a fool. Don't you dare do it. That boy is riding his fool heart out across 5 miles of dark for you right now. You hold on till he gets back. You owe him that. You hear me? You hold on." Her ear turned toward my voice. I don't make anything of it. An ear turns toward a sound. That's all an ear does. But I kept talking anyway because it was the only thing I had, and I understood then a little of what Caleb had understood without being taught. That when you can't do anything else, you can still put a rope of your own voice out into the dark where a thing is drifting, and hold the other end and refuse, just refuse, to let go of it. I lost the light outside. I heard Elia's muttering by the stove, feeding it what it didn't need, because a man has to do something with his hands or he'll come apart. Somewhere a coyote started up and another answered, and I thought about the boy in the dark, and I stopped thinking about it because it didn't help. And then a long time, a very long time, an hour that felt like a night, then hooves. Coming hard, too hard, coming at a run, and my heart went cold because a boy told to walk the wash does not come home at a run unless something has gone wrong, and Elias was already up and moving for the door. And the door banged open and there was Caleb, hatless, streaked with dust and sweat, a lidded pail hugged to his chest with both arms and the bay horse blowing hard behind him, and he was crying openly, the way a boy that age will die before he'll do in front of you unless something has broken his heart clean in two. "Is she?" He got out. "Papa, is she? Did she?" "She's here," Elias said. "Son, she's still here. You made it back." And Caleb crossed that barn in about 3 strides and went down on his knees in the straw beside her with the pail. And he saw how far gone she was, saw the gray of her and the drifting eyes. And I watched the hope drain right out of his face and something worse take its place. "She's dying," he whispered. "I was too slow. I stopped for the moon like you said, and I should have run it, I should have." "You did right," Elias said. "You did right, Caleb." But the boy wasn't listening. He was already dipping his fingers in the pale milk running warm down his wrist, pushing them into the corner of that long, soft mouth, whispering, come on, please," and she didn't take it. Her mouth didn't work. The milk ran back out and wet the straw. And I saw the moment Caleb understood he was going to lose. I've seen men understand that. Grown men, at a bedside, at a graveside. It's a particular thing that happens to a face, and to see it happen to a child's face is a thing I would spend money not to see again. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just bent over her, put his forehead down against her neck in the fur right at the place where her pulse should have been strong and wasn't, and he stayed there, shaking, and he said, so quiet I almost didn't catch it, he said, you can't. I came back. I said I'd come back and I came back, so you have to stay, that's the deal. And I'll tell you what I did then, and it isn't much, and it's the thing I'm least ashamed of in this whole story. I knelt down next to that boy and I took the pail out of his shaking hand so it wouldn't spill, and I said, Caleb, look at me. There's one more thing to try. My grandmother did it with lambs. It ain't dignified and it might not work, but it's a thing, and while there's a thing left to try, we ain't done. You hear me? We ain't done till we're out of things to try. He looked up at me, God, that face. What thing? He said. And I told him. The thing my grandmother did with lambs was this. When a newborn's too weak to suck, when the mouth's given up before the body has, you don't spoon it. Spooning drowns them. The milk goes down the wrong pipe, and they choke on the very thing come to save them. And I'd near done exactly that, watching Caleb dribble it into a mouth that couldn't work. What you do instead is you warm the milk more than seems right, blood warm, warmer, till it's near hot to your own wrist. And you soak a rag in it, clean cloth, and you don't try to make the animal drink at all. You make it want to. You put the warm, wet rag against the mouth and you let the smell and the heat do the asking, and you squeeze it slow, one drop at a time at the corner where the lip meets the gum, and you wait. You don't force. You wait. And sometimes, not always, my grandmother was clear about not always, Sometimes the body remembers what the mind's let go of. Sometimes the oldest part of a creature, the part that was suckling before it had a thought in its head, wakes up and takes over when everything else has quit. Tear me a strip off that flour sack, I told Caleb, clean end. And you, to Elias, get that milk hotter, not scalded, hot as a bath you'd hate. They moved. That's a thing about giving people a task in the worst moment of their lives. It's a mercy. Elias had been feeding a stove that didn't need it because he couldn't stand to be still, and now his stillness had somewhere to go. Caleb tore the sack with his teeth, hands shaking too bad to do it clean, and I didn't correct him, and we soaked the rag in milk hot enough to sting, and I pressed it to the corner of that long, soft, failing mouth. Now we wait, I said. And Caleb, you keep talking to her, same as you been. Your voice is doing more than my rag is, I'd wager. Don't you stop. So he talked. Cracked, exhausted, snot and tears on his face he didn't bother wiping. He put his mouth close to her ear and he talked. And I squeezed the rag, drop by drop, and Elias knelt on her other side with both his big hands flat on her ribs like he could push warmth through them by wanting it hard enough. And outside the coyotes went quiet, and the stove ticked, and the whole world narrowed down to the space inside that barn and the question of whether one small drop of milk would go the right way down. The first 10 drops did nothing, ran back out, wet the straw. The 11th, I felt it more than saw it. A twitch. The smallest movement at the corner of the mouth, a working, a lip finding the shape of a thing it had been born knowing. Again, I breathed. Do it again, girl, just like that. Drop 12, she swallowed. I heard Elias make a sound like he'd been hit. Caleb's talking stumbled and caught and went on. And drop by drop, slow, so slow, that mouth remembered its one job, and the swallowing came stronger. And after a while, I couldn't tell you how long time had gone strange. After a while, she was working the rag herself, pulling at it, weak but pulling, and I traded the rag for a rag and the rag for a rag as the pail cooled and warmed and cooled. And somewhere in the deep of that night, the drifting look went out of her eyes and something came back into them. Not strength, not yet, but presence. She was in there again, she'd come back up the rope. Caleb felt it before I said a word. Children do. He pulled back and looked at her face and she looked at his, and he made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob and entirely 11 years old, and he said, "She's looking at me. Papa, Papa, she's looking at me. I see it, son. She's gonna live." It wasn't a question and it wasn't quite a certainty either. It was a prayer with a boy's whole heart behind it. She's gonna live, isn't she? And here's a place I could have lied to him. A kinder man might have. But I'd promised myself years back I'd not lie to that boy, on account of I'd been lied to gentle as a child myself, and found the truth worse for the weight. I don't know, I told him. She's got a chance now she didn't have an hour ago, that's all I can promise you. She's got a chance, the rest is hers to take or not. I put my hand on the back of his neck the way you would with your own. But you gave it to her, Caleb, that chance. Nobody else in this county would have. You remember that whatever comes. You remember you gave it to her. He nodded. He didn't take his eyes off her. She lived till morning. I won't pretend the danger passed clean, because it didn't. There were 3 more nights that could have gone either way. 3 more nights one of us sat up with her while the others slept in shifts in the straw. And there was a bad afternoon on the second day when a chill went into her chest, and the rattle came back and I thought we'd lose her after all. But she came through. Each morning there was a little more gold in her and a little less gray, and by the end of that first week she could hold her own head up without it swaying, and by the end of the second she got her legs under her. I wish you could have seen it, the first time she stood. She'd been trying for a day. Getting the front legs braced and the back end wouldn't follow, or the back and not the front. A comedy of a thing, except nobody laughed because we were all holding our breath. And then one gray morning, with Caleb on one side saying, come on, and me on the other with my hands ready to catch what couldn't be caught, she gathered all 4 of those impossible legs under her at once and rose. Up and up and up, that neck unfolding toward the barn rafters. She stood there swaying, blinking, near as surprised as we were to find ourselves so high off the ground. And Caleb let out a whoop you could have heard in the next county and threw both arms as far around her front legs as they'd go, which wasn't far, and she bent that long neck down, and I swear this on anything you like, she nosed at his hair. Snuffled it. Like she was checking he was really there. Elias laughed. First real laugh I'd heard out of the man since the spring, since the grave. A rusty bro-coping sound like a pump that hasn't been worked in too long. And he looked at me over the top of his boy hugging that ridiculous, beautiful animal, and he shook his head, and he said, "What in God's name are we going to do with a giraffe, Amos?" Amos, that's my name. I've gone the whole story without giving it to you, and I don't rightly know why except that this isn't my story, it's the boy's, and mine only where it touches his. Damned if I know, I said. Feed it, I suppose. What's it eat? Turned out leaves, which we had some, cottonwood and mesquite and hackberry, and Caleb went at the gathering of them like it was the only job in the world. Up the trees I'd told him 100 times to stay out of, throwing down branches for her to strip. She ate like she was making up for lost time, which she was. She grew. Lord, how she grew. You could near watch it happen. Caleb named her Comet. On account of the tail, he said, though I never followed the logic and didn't ask. Comet. She'd come running. A giraffe runs. It's the strangest gait you ever saw. All that leg moving in slow motion, long strides that eat the ground faster than seems possible. She'd come running when he called it, across the whole of the near pasture, and pull up beside him and lower her head to be scratched between those fur-wrapped horns. And the two of them would stand there in the evening light, the boy and the animal from the far side of the world, like it was the most ordinary thing that ever was. Word got around, of course. You can't hide a giraffe. The Petersons rode over, and the family from the next section, and then folks from town who'd heard and didn't believe it. And for a few weeks that autumn, the marsh place had more visitors than it had seen in years. They'd stand at the fence and gape and shake their heads and go home to tell it and not be believed in turn. And I'll say this, it did something for Elias, all that. A man whose year had been nothing but loss and lean, and here came the whole county to his fence, not to pity him but to marvel, and some of the loss went off his shoulders those weeks. Comet did that. The wrong animal at the wrong farm, and she near mended a broken man without either of them trying. I thought that was the end of it, a strange good story with a happy shape. Then in November the letter came. It came the same way trouble usually does, polite, and on good paper. A man named Hartwell, the gentleman out east, the one the calf had been consigned to in the first place, the private collector building his menagerie of curiosities. His agent had traced the shipment. The mix-up at the Caldwell depot had been sorted, months late, and the ledger showed that one giraffe calf, female, consigned and paid for, had gone astray to a cattle farm in the wrong county, and Mr. Hartwell wanted his property. That was the word in the letter, property. He was, the letter allowed, willing to be generous. He understood the animal had been fed and housed, and he would reimburse reasonable costs. He would send men and a proper conveyance. He trusted there would be no difficulty, as the animal was, by paper and by law, indisputably his. And here is the second heavy thing, by the heaviest, and I've saved it for you the way it was saved for us. Because the letter was right. That's the part that made it so hard. If Hartwell had been a villain, if he'd been cruel or a liar or a fool, it would have been easy. You dig in, you fight, you feel righteous doing it. But he wasn't any of those. He was a man who'd paid good money for an animal that had come to us by pure clerical accident, and he wanted what was his, and he was offering to pay us fair on top of it. By every law and ledger in the country, Comet was his and never had been ours. And by every other measure that matters to a human heart, she was Caleb's, and the whole world knew it, and none of it counted for a thing on paper. Elias read the letter twice, same as he'd read the manifest 4 months before. Same face doing the same work, the page not agreeing with the world. Then he set it down on the porch rail and put his hand flat on top of it like it might blow away, or like he could hold the words down, and he looked out at the pasture where his boy was up a cottonwood throwing branches to a giraffe, and he was quiet a long time. "He can have her," Elias said finally, quiet. "By rights, he can just have her." "By rights," I said. "I don't have the money to buy her off him, even if he'd sell, which the letter don't offer. And I can't, Amos, I got no legal leg, she's his. It's his name on the paper." His jaw worked. "I could fight it and lose and pay a lawyer to lose it for me, money I don't have, and she'd go anyway. And I'd have spent our winter on a fight I knew I'd lose." He was doing the arithmetic, same as I'd done it that first afternoon, standing by the crate. Cut the loss. Let the cold have what the cold wants. And this time the arithmetic was even righter than it had been that day, because this time the law itself was doing the taking. "Yeah," I said, because he wasn't wrong. "But how do I tell him?" His voice went to nothing on it. "Amos, how in God's name do I tell my boy that the thing he saved, the thing he rode through the dark for, the thing he pulled back from dying with his own 2 hands, how do I tell him it was never his to keep? That some man he's never met owns it by a piece of paper? How do I make an 11-year-old understand that?" He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "He lost his mother this year. And now I've got to teach him you can love a thing with everything you've got and still not get to keep it. That's a thing a man learns. It ain't a thing an 11-year-old ought to have to." I didn't have an answer for him. I've never claimed I did. I'm a foreman, not a wise man, and the difference has never been clearer to me than it was on that porch. But I'll tell you what happened, because it's the part of this story I most want you to have. We didn't have to tell Caleb, he told us. He'd heard. Of course he'd heard the whole visit of that letter, our low voices on the porch. A boy misses nothing when it's about the thing he loves. He came down out of the cottonwood while we were still sitting in our silence, and he walked up onto the porch, and he stood there with bits of bark in his hair and his hands hanging at his sides, and he looked older than I'd ever seen him. That's the thing about the year Caleb was. He'd been catching up to himself all autumn, the boy and the man arriving in the same body, and right then, on that porch, I watched the man come the rest of the way in. "She has to go back," Caleb said, "to the man who bought her, doesn't she?" Elias started to answer and couldn't. "It's all right, Papa." And it wasn't, you could see in every line of him it wasn't, his chin doing that fight it does, his eyes bright and swimming, but he said it anyway, said it for his father, which is a thing I've seen sons do for fathers, and it turns me over every time. "I heard you. It's the law, she's his. You don't have to." He stopped, swallowed, started again. "I've been thinking about it up the tree. Caleb, she's not the same as when she got here," Caleb said. "When she got here she was gonna die. She couldn't stand and she couldn't eat, and she was gonna die in that crate, and nobody would have even known her." His voice climbed and he wrestled it back down, and Lord, the effort of it, the effort of a child holding his own heart with both hands. "But now she can run, and she's strong, and she eats good. And this man, he's got a whole place for animals like her, right? Other ones, so she wouldn't be the only one anymore. She wouldn't be the wrong animal in the wrong place. She'd be where she was supposed to go the whole time." He was making the case. Do you see it? He was building the argument that would let him bear it, finding, in a thing being torn out of him, the one shape of it he could live inside. She'll have others of her kind. She won't be alone. She's going where she was always meant to go. Every word of it true, and every word of it a stone he was laying down to stand on so the flood wouldn't take him under. And here the man slipped and the boy came through just for a second, his face crumpling. "I just don't want her to think I gave her away. When they come and take her. I don't want her to think that I stopped," he pressed his lips together hard, "that I stopped wanting her." And Elias was off that chair and had his son wrapped up in his arms before the sentence finished. And Caleb let himself be a child for exactly as long as that held him, his face in his father's shirt, his shoulders going, and Elias with his own face down in that barkful hair saying, "No, no, no, she won't. She could never," over and over. And I got up and went and found something to do in the barn, because some moments a third man's got no business witnessing. and I'd witnessed enough of this one to last me. Hartwell's men came in December. They came proper, a covered wagon built high, a padded stall inside it, two handlers who knew their business, and I'll give the man this, knew it gently. They'd expected trouble, I think, or an animal half wild and hard to load. They didn't expect what they found, which was a giraffe that came when a boy called her name, and stood quiet as a church while that boy walked her up the ramp himself, talking to her the whole way, the same low, endless rope of words he'd hauled her back to life with 4 months before. I watched Caleb walk her in. I watched him get her settled in the padded stall and check the straw with his own hands, and stand a minute with his forehead against her neck at the place where her pulse ran, the place he'd pressed his head the night she near died, and I couldn't hear what he said to her, and I didn't try. That was theirs. Then he came down the ramp, and he stood back, and he let the handlers close it up. He didn't cry. That surprised me. I'd braced for it, and it didn't come. He just stood there very straight and very quiet with that bent-nail stillness I've got myself, and watched them latch the gate. And when the lead handler, an older fellow, kind eyes, I liked him despite everything. When the man came over to settle up the reimbursement with Elias, he crouched down first to Caleb's level and said something to him, quiet, just the two of them. I asked Caleb later what the man said. He said the man told him he'd been handling animals for Mr. Hartwell 20 years, and he could always tell, always, no fail, the ones that had been loved and the ones that hadn't, and that this one had been loved as hard as any creature he'd ever collected, and that wherever she went, whatever she saw, whatever long years she lived, she'd carry that. That love doesn't wash off. That it goes in early, and it stays, down in the oldest part of a thing, the part that was suckling before it had a thought, and that Caleb had put something into that animal in 4 months that would outlast the both of them. Then the man stood up and tipped his hat to Elias, and they drove Comet away north up the same road she'd come in on. Caleb watched the wagon till it was a speck, and watched the speck till it was nothing, and then watched the nothing a while longer. And then he turned around and he went and got the axe, and he went to splitting the winter wood, hard, steady, not a word, and I let him, because I know what work is for. That's most of the story, but not the end of it, because the end came years on, and I'd be cheating you to stop before it. Elias made it through that winter and a good many after. The county never quite forgot the giraffe, and I think in some way the wonder of it, the sheer strange grace of a thing that had happened to them, to little Marsh's outfit in the middle of a lean bad year, I think it changed the flavor of the whole place. Bad years came after. They always do. But the Marsh place had this one impossible good thing in its history now. This creature that had fallen out of the wrong sky into the wrong yard and been saved, and you could see people draw on it. A hard-luck outfit that had, the once, done something purely fine for no gain at all. Caleb grew up, grew tall. I used to tell him Comet had rubbed off on him, and he'd roll his eyes, but he'd smile too. He grew up steady and quiet and good with animals in a way that couldn't be taught, that came from somewhere down deep, and when he was grown he didn't stay on to ranch. He went for a veterinary, studied it, made himself into a man who spent his life on the far end of that rope, the one you put out into the dark to a thing that's drifting and hold and refuse to let go of. I asked him once when he was grown and home for a visit whether he ever thought about her, Comet, whether it still sat wrong after all the years that he'd had to give her up. He was quiet a while. He had a way of going quiet before he answered a real question, same as his father, same as me. I think we taught it to him between us without meaning to. I used to think giving her back was the sad part, he said. For a long time, the taking away, I hated it. I hated that man Hartwell for years, some man I never even met just for owning a piece of paper. He turned his coffee cup around on the table. But I don't think that anymore. I think the sad part would have been if she died in that crate. That's the only real sad ending there was. Everything after that, the 4 months, the giving her back, all of it, that was just what having her cost, and it was worth every cent. He looked up at me. You told me that first night. You remember, you said I could remember I gave her a chance whatever came, that nobody else in the county would have, and I did. I've had that my whole life. That's not a thing anybody took away up that road. They can't. It's not on any paper of Hartwell's, it's mine. I told him I remembered. I didn't tell him what it cost me to hear him say it back, 30 years on, in a grown man's voice, the exact shape of a thing I'd said to a crying child in the straw when I hadn't even been sure it was true. He asked me, near the end of that visit, if I still had the ledger from that year, the one I'd been writing in on the porch the Thursday the crate came. I did. I've kept every one. I got it down off the shelf and I found the page, Thursday, the date, my thumb crease still in it faint after all the years, and there, in my own cramped hand, was the day's stock and the day's sums. And then in the margin, squeezed in sideways where I'd added it that night after they'd all gone to sleep, and I couldn't, 4 words I didn't even remember writing. Boy would not quit. That's all. No mention of the giraffe. No mention of the wonder of it, the whole county at the fence, the impossible gold creature from the far side of the world. Just the one thing that had struck me hard enough to break my own rule and write in a stock ledger something that wasn't stock. Boy would not quit. I showed it to him. Grown man, my old crooked writing about the child he'd been. He looked at it a long time. Then he asked if he could have the page. I tore it out and gave it to him. First page I ever tore from a ledger in my life, and I'd do it again. He's got children of his own now, I hear. I'm too old to travel and see them, and he's too busy hauling other men's dying animals back up the rope to travel and see me, but he writes. And in the last letter he told me the oldest boy had asked him, the way children do, what was the bravest thing his papa ever did. And Caleb wrote that he'd thought about it, and he hadn't told the boy about any of the grown things, the hard cases, and the long nights of his real work. He'd told him about a giraffe. He told him that once when he was small, the wrong animal came to the wrong farm and it was dying, and every grown man there was ready to let it. And that he, a boy, just a boy, no smarter or stronger than anybody, he hadn't done anything clever or hard. He just refused. He just decided the thing wasn't going to be cold and wasn't going to be alone and wasn't going to die if there was one single thing left to try. And that this had turned out to be the whole of it, the whole secret. If there was one, not being clever, not being strong. Just being the one who won't quit on a thing when quitting is the sensible choice. His boy, he wrote, had wanted to know if the giraffe was still alive somewhere. And Caleb wrote that he'd told him the truth, which is that he didn't know, that she'd have been long gone by now by the count of years. But that some things, once you've truly put your whole heart into keeping them, you don't ever really have to wonder whether they're still alive. Because they are, down in the oldest part of you. The part that was reaching for something warm before it ever had a thought in its head.